Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What is True. I'm broadcasting live at night on Facebook and YouTube. Also have a channel on Odyssey, Discerning What is True. Uh, what I'm going to be reading to you is Murder by Injection by by Eustace Mullins. This will be chapter 2. I did chapter 1 last night. Again, this is for those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. So let's get into the particular chapter here. The name of the chapter is called Quacks on Quackery. A quack is an ignorant pretender to medical or surgical skill. Quackery is considered a meaning of charlatan that is based upon 1783, based upon Crabbe, Crabbe, village, and here's the potent, quack, long verse in human ills, whose first insults the victim whom he kills. Interesting. That was from the Oxford English Dictionary. It doesn't say what year. The first significant figure in American medicine, according to Jeffrey Marks, was the theologian Cotton Mather, M-A-T-H-E-R, living from 1663 to 1728. He is the son of Increase Mather, the president of Harvard University. Cotton Mather wrote many theological works, but also wrote a full, lengthy medical work called The Angel of Bethesda, which he wrote from 1720 to 1724. So this is basically his last part of his life. His medical letters drew heavily on local Indian lore. He also pondered the mental factor in illness, noting that a cheerful heart does good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. That's a quote from him. And Mather seems to have been the first and last theologian to be interested in the practice of American medicine. The next figure of importance in American medicine was a Dr. Nathan Smith Davis from 1817 to 1904, after apprenticing under Dr. Daniel Clark in upstate New York. Davis moved to New York in 1847. As early as 1845, he had demanded that the Medical Society of the state of New York correct the more flagrant abuses in medical education, insisting that the 4 months of instruction then in vogue be increased to a period of 6 months. On May 11, 1846, he convened a group of physicians in New York to form the uses of the nucleus of the American Medical Association. The organization took on formal status the following year in Philadelphia on May 5, 1847. The official date of the American Medical Association came into being. The 100 delegates to the New York meeting had swelled to over 250 at Philadelphia. They soon formed state organizations in a number of states. Smith later moved to Chicago, where he joined the faculty of Rush Medical School in 1883 when the AMA founded its journal. He became the first editor, serving until 1889. Despite the good intentions of his founder, that is Dr. Davis, the AMA remained moribund for some 50 years. In 1899, the organization took a giant step forward with the arrival of one called Dr. George H. Simmons from Nebraska. Simmons, who throughout his life was known perhaps derisively as Doc, or DOC, is now remembered as the preeminent American quack. Born in Moreton, England, Simmons immigrated to the United States in 1870. Settled in the Midwest, he began his career as a journalist. It is interesting that the two other dominant figures in 20th century American medicine, that is Dr. Morris Fishbein and Albert Lasker, also began their careers as journalists. Fishbein remained a journalist all his life. Simmons became the editor of the Nebraska Farmer in Lincoln, Nebraska. Several years later, he decided to improve his finances by launching on a career of unparalleled medical quackery. Interesting enough, the AMA in 1868 had formally defined quackery as the sale or administration of drugs or treatment that are not approved by legal constituted medical authorities. Simmons ignored this requirement. No one has ever been able to determine that he had studied anywhere to qualify for a medical degree. Note again, he is a writer. So, nevertheless, he began to advertise that he was a licensee of the Rotunda Hospital of Dublin, referring presumably to Dublin, Ireland. In fact, Dublin hospitals never issued any license, nor was it authorized to do so. Wow, interesting information there, folks. No one ever bothered to raise the question as to why Simmons, who had supposedly arrived in the United States as a duly licensed physician, chose instead to practice journalism for some years. Yes, indeed. He also advertised he had spent a year and a half in the largest hospital in London. I don't know about that. What was the largest hospital? Although he refrained from making any claims as to what capacity, whether as a patient, an orderly, or other functionary. Years later, he obtained a diploma by mail from one of the nation's flourishing diploma mills called Rush Medical College in Chicago. While maintaining a full-time medical practice in Lincoln, there's no record that he ever set foot on the campus of Rush Medical College prior to retaining this degree. His protege, Morris Fishbein, also attended Rush Medical College. There was some question as to whether Fishbein ever actually graduated. That's correct, folks. Years later, in his time of influence, he became a professor there, specializing in teaching the public relations aspect of medicine. In their definite work, The Story of Medicine in America, Exhaustive and Detailed Complication, the authors Jeffrey Marks and William K. Beatty makes no mention of either Simmons or Fishbein, seemingly a glaring omission, you see, as they are the two most notorious practitioners in our medical history, apparently realizing that these two men were the two most famous quacks in medical history. The authors prudently decided to ignore them. In Who's Who, Simmons notes that he practiced medicine in Lincoln from 1884 to 1899. He lists his degree as L.M. Dublin, 1884. This raises further questions. Simmons had immigrated to the United States in 1870. He remained continuously in Lincoln from 1870 to 1899 when he went to Chicago. For some reason, he forbore the listing of the mail-order diploma from Rush Medical College in his Who's Who listing in 1936 edition. He had listed it in 1922 edition and receiving it in 1892. Here again, no one later raised the question of his educational record, which shows that he only began his medical education in Dublin after he had come to the United States. Doc Simmons' advertisement in Lincoln, which we have reproduced here, employed a standard phraseology of the time. A limited number of lady patients can be accommodated at my residence. This was a coded notification that he was engaged in the practice of abortion. He also operated in a beauty and massage parlor on the premises as part of the Lincoln Institute, which he was apparently the only official. His advertisement also identified him as a homeopathic physician, although he would soon embark on a career with AMA to destroy the profession of homeopathic in the United States. Interesting. His advertisements announced that he treats all medical and surgical diseases of women. Interesting. And I'm looking at this particular newspaper deal. Stating he had actually have spent a year and a half in the largest hospitals, not only in London, but in Vienna, and hold a diplomat at, I can't hardly read it, gynecology, and from the Rotunda Hospital in Dublin, Ireland. Treats all medical and surgical disease of women. Interesting. This guy probably was one who aborted their children. There is, for women's abortions. It's very hard to read here, but anyway, this is the line said, "A limited number of lady patients can be accommodated at my residence," was the form regularly used by abortionists in their advertising in those days. The London and Vienna hospital experienced the Irish license are fictitious. He never was, folks. This advertisement appeared at a later date than that, being the Lincoln Institute, but years before Doc Simmons had attained his diploma mill degree. Remember, diploma mill degree is basically kind of a correspondence, is what I understand, not being in class, but actually corresponding back and forth and writing the right answer, supposedly. Having learned about the American Medical Association, Simmons, always in search of more status, formed a Nebraska chapter of the Nebraska Medical Association. His talents as an organizer came to the attention of the Chicago headquarters, and he was summoned, to take over the editorship of the Journal of the AMA. Thus, Doc Simmons came to the AMA not as a physician, but as a journalist. He found the AMA was drifting along with no one capable of implementing a national policy. The situation was made to order for a man of his capabilities and drive. He soon named himself as secretary and general manager of the AMA, American Medical Association, launching the organization on its dictatorial and self-aggrandizing policies, which it had maintained to the present day. All monies accruing to the AMA passed through Simmons' hands, and he personally supervised every detail of the operations. He soon found an able and willing lieutenant to a man who had formerly served as secretary of Kentucky State Board of Health. He seemed to have been a man after Simmons' own heart, for he had been arrested after examiners found a shortage of some $62,000 in his accounts. As a member in good standing of the state bureaucracy, he managed to obtain an official pardon from the governor of Kentucky, with the general admonition that it might be best for him to settle elsewhere. Holy shit. Chicago was only a short train ride away, where he found that Simmons was overwhelmed by his credentials. This gentleman, Dr. E.E. Hyde, Hyde, died in 1912 from leukemia. This proved to be a fortuitous circumstance for another journalist waiting in the wings, Dr. Morris Fishbein. Fishbein has apparently completed his studies at Rush Medical College, but he had not yet been awarded his diploma. In any case, he did not want to become a doctor. He had desultorily served as an intern at Durant Hospital for a few months, but he was unwilling to comply with the then regulations requiring a 2-year internship in an accredited hospital. He was seriously considering a career as a circus acrobat and had been working part-time as an extra in an opera company. He had also learned of a possible opening of the AMA and had been doing some part-time writing there during Dr. Hyde's terminal illness. Simmons had also found Fishbein to be a man after his own heart. When Dr. Hyde died, Simmons at once offered the youth a very handsome starting salary of $100 a month, a high figure for 1913. Fishbein found a home at the AMA. He did not leave until 1949, when he was literally kicked out. When the advent of Fishbein, the AMA, American Medical Association, was now firmly in the hands of the nation's two most aggressive quacks. Simmons, who had practiced medicine for years, unembarrassed by the fact that he had no medical degree which would hold up under the light of day, and Morris Fishbein, who admitted under oath in 1938 that he had never practiced medicine a day in his life. Because Doc Simmons, as he was generally known, has never shown any motivation in his career except greed. He soon realized that the enormous power which the AMA was capable of had in effect launched him into a gold mine. He was not slow to request certain considerations in return for the favor of the goodwill of the AMA. First and foremost was its seal of approval for new products, since the AMA early on had virtually no laboratory, testing equipment, or research staff. The seal of approval was obtained by Green's research, that is, the laborious determination of how much the supplicant could afford to pay and how much it might be worth to him. At first, some pharmaceutical manufacturers resented this arrangement and refused to pay. The leader of the opposition was Dr. Wallace C. Abbott, who had founded Abbott Laboratories in 1900. Simmons met him head-on by refusing to approve a single product of Abbott Laboratories, no matter how many were submitted. This standoff continued for some time until one morning Doc Simmons was visually shaken to see Dr. Abbott towering over him in his office. "Well, sir," he stammered, "and just what can I do for you? I just came down here from your personal," Dr. Abbott replied. "Why not one of my products has ever been approved by the AMA?" "That's not really my department, sir," Dr. Simmons replied. "I'll be glad to check with our research department and find out what the problem is. Is there any way I could speed up your inquiry?" asked Dr. Abbott. Simmons was overjoyed. At last, the stubborn chemist was beginning to see things his way. "I'm glad to do whatever I can," he said. "There's something you can do," said Dr. Abbott. "If you would be so good as to look over these documents, it might help you to make up your mind." He spread a number of papers out on Doc Simmons' desk. Simmons immediately realized that he was looking at a complete record of his career, carefully guarded by private detectives who had been hired by Dr. Abbott. There were the full details of the so-called diplomas, that is, records of sex charges brought against Simmons by former patients in Lincoln, and other titillating items such as charges of medical negligence resulting in deaths of patients. He knew that he was trapped. "All right," said Simmons, "just what is it you want?" "All I want is to have the AMA grant of approval of my product," said Dr. Abbott. "Do you think that is possible now?" "You got it," said Simmons. From that day, the products from Abbott's firms, which were still called Abbott Biological at that time, were rushed through the AMA process and marked approved. Dr. Abbott never paid 1 cent for this special treatment. He blackmailed him, but he's also had the truth on him. Through the years, that tells you a lot about these two men already. Through the years, various versions of the Abbott-Simmons conflict were repeated. A whitewashed version appeared in Tom Mahoney's Merchants of Light, which claims that Simmons objected to Dr. Abbott's commercialization of the medical profession and wished to teach him a lesson. The Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry not only refused to approve any of Abbott's drugs, but also turned down his request to advertise in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and later refused to print his letters of protest. Simmons then launched personal attacks on Dr. Abbott in the journey. Wow, these guys are bad. In the journal, in the issues of December 1907 and March 1908. Simmons' pious claim that he did not wish to see Dr. Abbott's commercializing the medical profession rings hollow, you see. Abbott was manufacturing pharmaceutical products for sale. The rub was that he refused to pay the usual shakedown to Simmons. After the imbroglio was settled, that is, S. DeWitt Clough, Clough, Abbott's advertising manager, became a bridge-playing crony of Morris Fishbein. A spirited critical of the AMA during the Simmons-Fishbein period, Dr. Emmanuel Josephson of New York wrote the methods. This is a writer who's done many articles. This Dr. Emmanuel Josephson did articles on Rockefeller. He's wrote books. And he was a legitimate author. The methods which Simmons and his crew used in their battle for monopoly of medical publications and advertising to the profession were often cruel and illegitimate. The AMA had openly threatened firms that advertised in media other than their own journal with withdrawal of acceptance of their products. Dr. Joseph described Simmons' practice as conspiracy and restraint of trade and extortion. He further charged correctly, that almost every branch of the federal government active in the field of medicine was completely dominated by this association. This was borne out by the present writer, who cited many instances later of the government agency actively implementing the most horrendous cases of racketeering by the drug trusts. So exhaustive were the controls set in place by Simmons that the president of the AMA, Dr. Nathan B. Van Elten, ETTEN, later filed a sworn affidavit in the New York District Court that he, as president of the American Medical Association, had no authority to accept any monies or enter into any contracts. All such deals were the province of the Chicago headquarters staff. It was later noted that AMA focuses on protecting physicians' income against government intrusions in the practice of medicine. This was a case of having their cake and eating it too. While steadfastly opposing any government supervision of the medical monopoly, the monopolies frequently forced various government agencies to act against anyone who posed a threat to their monopoly, having them arrested, prosecuted, and sent to prison. Doc Simmons' political dominance in the American Medical Association led him into numerous sidelines. In 1921, he established the Institute of Medicine in Chicago. This apparently was nothing more than a holding company for his bribes. He had also been enjoying the perquisites of the American success story, a buxom mistress installed in a luxurious Gold Coast apartment. Scoundrel that he was, Simmons was not content to flaunt this fiancée to his wife. He also became increasingly cruel in his determination to get rid of her. He then embarked on a classic ploy. The physician attempted to dispose of his unwanted wife by playing her with narcotics, trying to convince her that she is going insane. People heard that before? And hopefully driving her to suicide. After several months of this treatment, his wife fought back by filing suit against him. A highly publicized trial in 1924 ended in his wife's testimony that he had given her heavy doses of narcotics prescribed on the strength of his medical experience, and then began proceeding to have her declared insane. This was not such an unusual procedure during that period. It had happened to literally hundreds of wives. However, his wife proved to be tougher than most victims. She testified in court that he had tried to have her framed on a charge of insanity. This trial inspired more than a dozen subsequent books, plays, and movies based on the story of a physician who tries to drive his wife insane through campaigning, administration of drugs, and psychological terrorism. And here's the key. The most famous was the movie called Gaslight, in which Charles Boyer, B-O-Y-E-R, played the role of Doc Simmons to perfection, the luckless wife being played by Ingrid Bergman. You hear that, folks? Gaslighting. The trial brought Simmons a torrent of unpleasant publicity and forced his retirement as a head of the AMA. However, he retained the title of General Editor Emeritus, absenting himself in 1924 until his death in 1937. Morris Fishbein, still operating on his lucky star, was now moved into total dominance of the AMA. Between the two of them, they controlled the AMA for more than half a century, perfecting their technique for using this organization to raise money, exercise political clout, and maintain dominance over physicians, hospitals, drug companies, and concerted government agencies. Simmons moved to Hawaii, Florida, where he lived until 1937. His New York Times obituary was headlined and noted for the war on quacks. His longtime critic, Dr. Emmanuel Josephson, noted that this was an odd memory for a man who had long been known as the Prince of Quacks. Morris Fishbein also inherited Simmons' able assistant at the AMA, Dr. Olin West, that's O-L-I-N. He was born in 1874 and passed away in 1952. West had been state director in Tennessee for the Rockefeller Sanitarium Commission from 1910 to 1918. Thus, he had the requisite credentials as a representative of the Rockefeller connection at the AMA headquarters. You hear it? You hear it? Dr. Josephson later termed Fishbein the Hitler of the medical profession and West as his Goering. Fishbein remained aware of the AMA's ability to use government employees for the AMA purposes. Of the first 15 members of the Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry, 3 had been members of the federal government. My, oh my. Something's dirty here for sure. With the disappearance of Simmons, Fishbein now had a free hand. From that day on, he made sure that when anyone mentioned the AMA, they also paid tribute to Morris Fishbein, you see. He used his position there to launch a host of private enterprises, including book publishing, lecturing, and writing feature newspaper columns on a very modest salary of $24,000 a year from the AMA. Fishbein became, that's pretty decent money there, folks. That's pretty good money. At that time, that's a lot of money. Fishbein became the playboy of the Western world, that is. His children were supervised by a French governess, while he communed weekly to New York to be seen at the Stork Club. Well, I guess someone else has been involved in the Stork Club. It just did something on him. That's right. The famous FBI guy. Yes, I talked about him. Wow. Anyway. Fees, kickbacks, awards, and other monies poured into his coffers in a veritable flood. During his 25 years of the power of the AMA, he never lost the opportunity to advertise and enrich himself, despite the fact that he had never practiced medicine a day in his life. He persuaded King Features Syndicate to sign him on a daily columnist writing a medical commentary which appeared in over 200 newspapers. Again, this is not a doctor, folks. This is a stinking, rotten person. A full-page ad appeared in Editor and Publisher to celebrate his new venture on March 23rd, 1940, stating the authority of medicine. Dr. Fishbein name is synonymous with the sterling stamp on a piece of silver. Whether this was an oblique reference to Judas is not clear. That is Judas Iscariot. Fishbein garnered additional income by having himself named medical advisor to Look magazine, the second largest publication in the United States. In 1935, he had ventured into what was probably his greatest financial coup, the annual publication of a massive volume, The Modern Home Medical Advisor. The book was written for him by doctors on consignment, but he wrote the lurid advertising copy, endorsed by doctors everywhere. The wealthiest millionaire could not buy better health guidance. Obviously, no doctor anywhere dared to criticize the book. Fishbein's steadily gravitating power at the AMA were veiled. That we're talking about, I meant to say, was this J. Everett Hoover, who's also a member of the Stork Club, which was another phony, which I did a video on him yesterday or the day before, reading about him. Again, Eustace Mullins was really involved with this stuff. So where are we at here? He also maintained absolute control of the selection of the personnel of the various committees of the AMA, so that no one was ever in position to attack him. The Committee on Food and the Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry were his particular preserves because of the great power they had over manufacturing and advertising. The Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry had been set up in 1905. At the same time that the Food and Drug Act had been passed by Congress. The two groups always worked together very closely. As advertisement revenues increased each year, Fishbein steadfastly denied that any profits were being made by the AMA. He was quoted in a reviews, that is in 1926, far from being the corporation not-for-profit, which the statute lists it. The American Medical Association had been exceedingly profitable to the public, both in dollars and in lives. Thus, Fishbein adeptly turned aside growing criticism of the income of the AMA by his claim that it was profitable to the public at large. Under Fishbein's editorship, the AMA Health magazine, called Hygeia, carried the banner headline, "Pure Foods Honestly Advertised." The seal of acceptance of the Committee on Foods of the AMA is your best guarantee that the claims of quality for any product are correct and that the advertising for it is truthful. Look for the seal on every food that you buy. White Star Tuna and Chicken of the Sea brand tuna had this acceptance. At the very time that Fishbein was running these advertisements, the Food and Drug Administration were repeatedly seizing shipments of these very brands of tuna, condemning them because they consisted in whole or in part of decomposed animal substance. So much for the seal of acceptance, folks. The AMA Committee on Foods always verged on the brink of exposure or serious damage suits because it had virtually no testing apparatus. The June 24, 1931 issue of Business Week raised serious questions about these operations, particularly the power of the AMA to censor, manufacture, and copy. Business Week asked whether a national body of professional men conducted presumably on the highest ethical plane is not continually exceeding the national boundaries of its actions when it attempts to assume police and regulatory powers over the nation's largest industry. The editor of the Business Week were well aware that the staff at AMA did little testing and were not qualified to render judgments on the acceptance of products. The magazine's story may have been intended as a quiet warning to the AMA to cease and desist its activities in this field. They reckon without Fishbein's Chabaz, that is, the AMA Committee on Foods under Fishbein guidance continued its operation for another decade. In 1939, Fishbein awarded the seal of acceptance to some 2,706 individual products, which were produced by some 1,653 companies. Its chief rival in the field, which I remember as a child, the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. had also come under increasing fire for its aggressive tactics in seeking more customers for its seal. In May 1941, the Federal Trade Commission issued cease and desist orders against the Good Housekeeping seal. Fishbein saw the handwriting on the wall, and shortly afterwards, he discontinued the AMA Seal of Acceptance Awards for general purpose foods. My, oh my, this is amazing. So you see, the Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry was quite enough matter. This was the key to the big money. A drug company could make $100 million on a new product if it were to be released under the proper auspices. The most vital, of course, was the AMA Seal of Acceptance. The opportunities for large-scale bribery, conspiracy, and corruption were too prevalent to be ignored. One physician who was very conscious of this was Dr. Emanuel Josephson of New York. Heir to a large fortune, Dr. Josephson resided in a multi-million-dollar townhouse in the city's most expensive area, just around the corner from Nelson Rockefeller on the famous Upper East Side. Josephson was unable to conceal his contempt for Fishbein and his money-grubbing activities. On January 2nd, 1932, he officially resigned from the AMA's New York City Medical Society. The AMA chose to ignore his letter of resignation until 1938, when Fishbein released a letter claiming the AMA has several connections with him. It's the opposite way, folks. Wow. In 1939, I've done books also about this Dr. Josephson, a writer. Okay, he's written books also. You can look for them. You're not going to find these books not at Amazon. You're going to have to look deep for these guys, probably on eBay. In 1939, Dr. Josephson submitted the important record of the groundbreaking research to Science magazine. Vitamin E therapy of myasthenia, that is Graves, Gravis, which they refused to print. Dr. Joseph later pointed out that the AMA had deliberately concealed the benefits of vitamin E therapy for more than 25 years. This is only one instance of 100 in which the AMA withheld life-saving information from the public. The benefits of vitamin E therapy are now generally recognized by the medical profession. But the AMA technique for controlling all new products was revealed by a United Press dispatch January 20th, 1940, that the AMA had a well-defined newspaper policy, never to call anything a cure. And no, that's correct. And doctors don't even say it either. They never say cure. Or any fact given publicity to any remedy of any description without a thorough investigation. The organization usually recommended that any report of a remedy should be referred to the New York branch of the AMA for investigation. As Dr. Josephson testified, he had tried for years to get the New York chapter of the AMA to investigate his findings, but they always refused. The AMA Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry had effectively solidified its control by amending the official AMA Code of Ethics to prohibit individual physicians from giving any testimonies in favor of any drug. This amendment protected the valuable monopoly of the AMA headquarters in Chicago. A distinguished scientist and teacher, Dr. Frank G. Lystron, Lydstone, published a booklet, Why the AMA is Going Backwards, in which he stated, the achievement of what the oligarchy of the AMA had boasted more philosophy has been its belay war on proprietors, quack medicine manufacturers, and unproven products. When I recall the nauseous array of proprietary fakes on the advertisement on which the oligarchy built its financial prosperity, its holier-than-thou pose is sickening. It was fitted to its psychic constitution that after the AMA has for years done its level best to promulgate the interests and to fatten upon fake manufacturers and professional poisoners of the innocent, and it should bite the hand that fed it. Despotic power such as this, as the oligarchy wields over the food and drug manufacturers, is dangerous. And human nature being what it is, that power might be expected to sooner or later to be abused. Dr. Josephson also observed that the history of the AMA seal of acceptance is repleted with betrayals of professional and public trust. Drug products of the highest value have been rejected or their acceptance unwarrantably delayed. Worthless, dangerous, or deadly food and drugs have been hastily accepted. On April 20th, 1936, Time magazine reported that the American Medical Association was then worth $3.8 million, of which $2 million was in government bonds, $1 million in cash, with an estimated $800,000 headquarters building in Chicago. Time had also mentioned another little known aspect of the AMA medical monopoly. Shoes designed to correct foot troubles must be approved by AMA before a conscientious physician may prescribe them. Just how did the AMA have set up this shoe monopoly was not clear. On July 7, 1961, Time reported that AMA Journal now had a circulation of 180,000 people with incomes of over near $16 million a year. The bulk from ads in its publication mainly by drug and appliance makers. The AMA Constitution stated that it was organized to promote the art, science, and medicine and development of public health. Yet the history of the AMA was repleted with events which contradicted this goal. Literacy Digest reported in June 11, 1927, that the AMA had adopted a resolution that alcohol had no scientific place in medicine. In all fairness, it should be reported that the 1917 resolution had probably been passed at the behest of the Rockefeller interests, you see, which for their own hidden purposes were strongly supporting passage of prohibition at the time. On February 9, 1977, the Federal Trade Commission issued an order against the AMA because it had barred certain drug advertisements. Throughout the 25 years reign of Morris Fishbein at the AMA, the organization repeatedly made bewildering about face recognition on certain products. The reason for such reversals being known only by Fishbein himself. The situation also offered impressive profits to be made by investing in the stock of certain drug firms just before it received the coveted AMA seal of acceptance, you see, for a new product. After such an announcement, it was not unusual for the stock of the drug firm to double in price. Only Dr. Fishbein knew which such an approval would be released. One of the most reprehensible decisions made by Dr. Fishbein during his long reign at the AMA was his move to hush up a dangerous outbreak of amoeba dysentery, in Chicago at the height of the World's Fair observance in 1933. Although the cause of the outbreak was traced to faulty plumbing at the Congress Hotel, Fishbein met with a group of Chicago business leaders and pledged the cooperation of the AMA in holding back any warnings until the fair had ended its season. Hundreds of unsuspecting tourists who visit the World Fair return to their hometowns infected with terrible illnesses, which often linger for years and is very difficult to treat or to cure. My, oh my. Why I know so much about this is I've done some videos on Harry Hoxsey, who was a good man, a very good man, and who stood against this guy many times. That's why I know who this guy is. This guy is a thief. He's a liar. The list of dangerous drugs approved by Fishbein during his tenure as public spokesman for the AMA is lengthy and terrifying. Fishbein hastened to approve the notorious diet drug called ditropicanol, despite laboratory records that it was dangerous to health. Another drug, triparasamide, spelled Tryparasamide, manufactured by Merck under license from the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, was a dangerous arsenic drug used to counter the effects of syphilis. It was abandoned by its discoverer, Paul Ehrlich, that is P-A-U-L, Ehrlich, E-H-R-L-I-C-H, when he found that it caused blindness by atrophying the optical nerve. Ehrlich's warning did not prevent the AMA, Merck, or the Rockefeller Institute from continuing to distribute this drug. Even in the issue of June 21st, 1937, Morris Fishbein had a cover portrayal on Time magazine. It was an unusual, unflattering photograph in which Fishbein looked as though he needed a doctor. That is, Time had published a story earlier that year that Fishbein was suffering from Bell palsy. The right side of his face hung slack, and he was obviously in very poor condition. One of Fishbein's most dangerous errors was his approval of sulfatilazole. I'll spell that for you again, Sulfathiazole in 1941. On January 25th, 1941, Fishbein announced that the Winthrop Drug Company, sulfatilazole, had been accepted by the Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry for inclusion in its official volume of new and non-official remedies. Winthrop was a subsidiary of the international drug cartel of the IG Farben Company. Sulfonylurea was also approved by Dr. J.J. Durrett, D-U-R-R-E-T-T, the FDA official in charge of new drugs. Durrett was a Rockefeller-approved appointee to this vital position. By December 1940, 400,000 tablets had been sold, which contained as much as 5 grams each of luminol, L-U-M-I-N-A-L. The safe dosage was 1 gram of luminol. Many persons who took the Winthrop doses never woke up. In 1937, the AMA approved a extremely poisonous preparation of sulfonine. I'll spell that for you again, S-U-L-F-A-N-I-L-A-N-I-D-E, in a solution of dialene glycol. This mixture caused a number of fatalities. It caused white blood cell loss, even though it was advertised that it would help heart disease. Long after Fishbein's departure, the AMA continued to endorse potential dangerous products. The winter issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association featured advertisements for Suprol, S-U-P-R-O-L, and 200 milligram capsules, which is called Suprafen, an analgesic which had been approved by the FDA in December of 1985. It was produced by Amneal, a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson. By February 13, 1986, the firm had received the first report of acute kidney damage. Yet on December 2nd, the FDA Arthritis Advisory Board recommended that Suprol remain on sale as an alternate anesthesia. It had already been banned in Denmark, Greece, Ireland, Italy, and Great Britain. Amneal suspended its production here on May 15th. I assume that's in 1986. One of the most reprehensive episodes in Fishbein's long career was his denial of seal of acceptance of the AMA to sulfonamide, although it had been saving lives in Europe for several years because its producers had failed to negotiate a satisfactory deal with Fishbein. Numerous persons in the United States continued to die of septicemia or blood poisoning. The dam finally broke when a member of the Roosevelt family, in dire need of immediate treatment with sulfonamide, had his physician obtain a special supply. Shortly thereafter, the AMA Council was forced to accept it. In 1935 and 36, the Council accepted and advertised in the journal a heart stimulant called Digitol, D-I-G-I-T-O-L, at the very time that the government agents were seizing and condemning interstate shipments of this drug as a substance dangerous to life. Another product is called Ergot, E-R-G-O-T, accepted, A-S-E-P-T-I-C, was accepted by the Council, and advertising for this product prominently featured in the journal. At the same time, the government agents were seizing and condemning its shipments because of adulterous and misbranding. Under the leadership of the nation's two most notorious quacks, Simmons and Fishbein, a gigantic nationwide drug operation was perfected, which today poses a serious threat to the health of every American citizen. The fixed price of these drugs had been a contributing factor to the meteoric rise in costs of health care. In 1976, the national bill was $95 billion, which was 8.4% of the gross national product, a figure which had risen from 4.5% in 1962. From 1955 to 1975, the price index rose 74%, while the cost of medical care rose 300%. Remember, the government got involved in a lot of this, folks, too. In the mid-60s, they began to get involved into what we call medical insurance. And also in the early 70s, all county hospitals began to close as the corporate hospitals began to take control. Another racket. Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn, an independent health practitioner, estimated that 30% of x-rays taken in the United States, that is some 300 million a year, are ordered when there is no valid medical need. A federal expert reports that it would reduce the unnecessary x-rays by 1/3, which could save the lives of 1,000 cancer patients each year. Yet the responsible organization, that is the American Cancer Society, has consistently ignored this problem. The genetic effect of X-rays on the population in a single year has been predicted to cause as many as 30,000 deaths per year in future years, folks. When you take those X-rays, when you take those mammograms, you're asking for trouble, okay? In 1976, doctors wrote 1 billion doses for sleeping pills, some 27 million prescriptions, which resulted in 25,000 trips to the emergency room for adverse drug reactions and some 1,500 emergency room deaths from tranquilizers. 90% of those victims are women. By 1978, 5 billion tranquilizer pills were being prescribed. The most notorious of these was Valium. Valium produced $500 million per year income for Hoffman La Roche Company. It is the epitome of the medical soma, S-O-M-A, described by Aldous Huxley in his Brave New World. The perfect drug, narcotic, pleasantly hallucinated. An English study showing that aspirin caused fetal defects and deaths, birth defects, and bleeding in newborn babies. Recently, a nationwide campaign was launched proclaiming that new studies showed that an aspirin a day would prevent heart attacks in men. It's all bullshit, folks. All bullshit. Afterthought suggested that it might be wise to check with a personal physician before embarking on this regimen. But how many thousands of men will at once begin to take a daily aspirin, hoping to postpone a dreaded heart attack, and unaware that they may be suffering from another result of the ingestion of the aspirin, internal bleeding? White widow bark be what I recommend. Not for heart, though, you see. The aspirin was used, as far as I remember, for headaches. That's not used anymore in that regard, but there are people who take aspirin for their heart. It is this property of thinning the blood which causes it to be recommended as a preventive for heart attacks. Aspirin is also a doubtful value when taken to reduce fever. By reducing fever in some instances, notably during the onset of pneumonia, it disguises the symptoms of pneumonia so that the physician is unable to make this diagnosis. It usually takes 20 minutes to dissolve in the stomach, and then only if it is taken with a full glass, that is 8 ounces of water. Few people know that if aspirin is taken with orange juice, its efficacy is greatly diminished because it may not dissolve. In September of 1980, over 40 years ago, the Food and Drug Administration announced that it would remove from the market more than 3,000 drugs whose effectiveness had not been proven. During the previous year, Americans had spent more than $1 billion on these same unproven drugs, many of which have been accepted by the AMA. You see. In 1962, Congress had passed an amendment to the Food and Drug Act, which implemented drug effectiveness requirements by 1964. The drug manufacturers resisted all attempts to force them to comply with these amendments, forcing the FDA to remove them from the market some 16 years later. So in 1978, they took it back down. The average life of effective drugs is about 15 years. This means that the delaying tactic of the drug manufacturer has allowed them to milk these unproven drugs for their entire effective market life. We now come to the most amazing record of criminal syndicism in our history. After Congress had passed stringent requirements in 1962 to force the drug manufacturers to prove that their drugs were effective, that is, in parentheses, a requirement which in many cases was impossible to observe since they were worthless, the drug manufacturers were advised by their cohorts in the AMA and the advertising industry that it would be wise to start a brush fire, a diversionary tactic which would draw attention from the fact that they had failed to comply with the new congressional requirements. This diversionary tactic was to be called the War Against Quackery. A few months after the new regulations went into effect, the AMA Board of Trustees met to create a new committee, the Committee on Quackery, which was formally incorporated on November 2nd, 1963. It was originally intended to destroy the entire profession of chiropractors in the United States, the nation's second largest healthcare group. It soon branched out in search of other victims as the Coordinated Conference on Health Information. The subsidiary was the brainchild of a New York letterhead outfit called the Pharmaceutical Advertising Council, which in turn was merely a space on the desk of the president of Gray GREY, medical advertisement company, a wholly owned subsidiary of the prestigious Gray Advertising Company in New York. Although it was essentially merely an advisory group, the Coordinated Conference on the Health Information soon launched an all-out war on independent health practitioners all over the United States. Its victims were usually selected by the nonprofit AMA, aided by the charitable foundations named as the American Cancer Society and the Arthritis Foundation, both which had been smarting under accusations that they were killing patients while independent health advisors were saving them. The criminal syndicates, that is, were able to enlist the full police powers of the federal government through contacts in the Federal Trade Commission, the Post Office Department, the Food and Drug Administration, and the United States Public Health Services. These federal agents were solicited by the charitable foundations to initiate police actions against hundreds of unsuspecting health practitioners throughout the United States. It was one of the most massive, well-planned, and ruthless operations which the federal agents ever engaged. In many cases, people were arrested for selling or something giving away booklets which advertised such inconspicuous health practices as taking vitamins. These distributors now found themselves under restraining orders from the Post Office, the Department of Justice, and the Food and Drug Administration, you see. Others who were distributing various salves, nostrums, and other preparations, most of them based on herbal formulas, received heavy fines and prison sentences. In every case, all of the stocks of these practitioners, many of whom were elderly and impoverished, were seized and destroyed as dangerous substances. It was never alleged that a single person had ever been injured, much less killed, by any of these preparations. At the same time, the drug manufacturers would continue to sell drugs which produced extensively side effects such as kidney damage, liver damage, and death. Not one of them was ever enjoined from distributing these products on the terms used against the independent health practitioners. It's all about destroying the people, the little guys, trying to really actually help people, you see. It's all about them. It's the little guy. It's always been against the little guy, folks. Always, in every area in this particular country. It is. It's always against the little guy. It's always the guy who's trying to do what's right. They're beat over the head, you see. Because money makes decisions for most people, folks. It's not the truth. Money is. In most cases, when these dangerous drugs were banned in the United States, the manufacturers shipped them overseas to countries in Latin America and Asia, where they continue to be sold to this day. The stock of Syntax, SYNTX Corporation, rose from a few dollars to a high of over $400 a share when it started dumping steroids in foreign markets. It's all about money. It ain't about fucking truth. Never has been. Many of the attacks were focused against the distributors of the anti-cancer preparation called Laetrile, which is called V17. Oh yes, it's a fruit product. It's a seed. Comes from nature. We have to attack nature. We have to kill nature in every way in the world. Yet, thousands and thousands of years ago, that was the only way you could actually solve anything. It's actually anti-life, folks. That's their program. Anti-life. Extremely sensitive to any rivals of their very profitable chemotherapy drugs, the cancer profiteers ordered the federal agents to carry out terror raids against their competitors. Oh yes, big time competitors. Oh yeah, almond seeds. Oh yeah, Laetrile. Yeah. This world is fucking messed up, folks. And if you don't speak out against it, it continues to get worse and worse. Cancer's profiteers ordered the federal agents to carry out terror raids against their competition, often striking at night in groups of heavily armed SWAT teams. This is correct, folks. This is not a fucking lie. This is true. The federal agents broke down doors to capture elderly women and their stocks of herbal teas. Many of these housewives and retired persons carry small amounts of vitamins and health preparations which they furnish to neighbors or friends at no cost. You hear that? Or at cost, I should say. They had no funds to fight the massive agendas agencies of the federal government who themselves were merely patsies for the drug trust. In many cases, the victims lost their homes, their life savings, and all of the attachable assets because they had posed a threat to the medical monopoly. It was the most blatant use of police powers by the big rich to protect their profitable enterprise. To this day, most of these victims have no idea that they were knocked off by the Rockefeller monopoly. These people are a bunch of shit. Stop being fucking fearful, these idiots. Because they're the ones that are anti-life in every aspect, folks. They are. They kill people for money. They have doctors who do the same thing. Sidney W. Bishop, Deputy Postmaster General, boasted at the Second National Congress of Medical Quackery in 1963, "I am particularly proud of the excellent arrangement existing between the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Post Office Department to maintain coordination in the exchange of information leading to the establishment of criminal prosecution, a laudatory reference to the success of the war against quackery." It was later revealed that the Coordinator Conference of Health Information had been entirely financed by the leading drug companies of the medical monopoly. That is, Laboratorio, Hoffman LaRouche, and others. And from 1964 to 1974, their search and destroy campaigns were carried on as total war by federal agents against anyone who had ever offered any type of health food or health advice. The goal, of course, was to eliminate all competition to the major drug companies. Why don't you stop taking the fucking drugs, people? Why don't you stop it? Why don't you stand up for a change? Why don't you stand up for a change? Might be important in your life too, folks. Somebody else trying to take care of you and help you. Yeah, I'm mad. You betcha I am. You see all this kind of shit going on? In 1967, the AMA received 43% of its total income, $13.6 million from its drug advertisements, and then issued a letter of agreement jointly with the Food and Drug Administration publicizing a campaign to enhance public awareness of health fraud devices and products by identifying them as ineffective and potentially health hazards. These were the same persons who had been unable to persuade the drug companies to comply with federal requirements that they prove the effectiveness of their drug products. The hazards, as we have stated, lay more with the drug trust than from the elderly ladies in California who are advising people to eat more garlic and lettuce if they wish to stay healthy. The death tolls were from approved drugs, not from preparation distributed by the Holistic Health Advocates. The AMA then sponsored a National Health Fraud Conference, whose principal spokesman was Congressman Claude Pepper. You remember him? He was from the state of Florida. I remember him quite well. This was an ironic turn of events because a few years earlier, the then Senator Claude Pepper was one of the most powerful political figures in Washington, and aroused the ire of the AMA because he planned to support socialized medicine in the United States, a longtime spokesman for left-wing interests. He was known as Red Pepper because of his political sympathies. Pepper had found himself attacked by the big guns and money of the AMA. They found a candidate to oppose him in Nixon's friend called George Smathers. Pepper were defeated in Florida. Coming back as a congressman, Pepper now licked the boots of those who had ousted him. He endorsed their police state methods against anyone who dared to challenge the power of the medical monopoly. My, oh my. Having proved the loyalty to the Rockefeller power, Pepper was allowed to stage another health conference in 1984. He was denounced by informed observers as a typical Moscow show trial. The new Pepper sideshow was called the Congressional Hearings on Quackery. Pepper claimed that the health fraud was a $10 billion a year scandal. Oh, wow. Really? Give me a break. He summoned a longtime apologist for the medical monopoly, Dr. Victor Herbert, a physician at the Bronx Medical Administration Hospital. Herbert demanded that the Justice Department used a RICO, racketeer-inspired criminal organization, strike force against medical charlatans and health frauds by using the same techniques which have been employed against organized crime. RICO allowed the government to confiscate all assets of those who are convicted as a result of a proven conspiracy. In December 1987, the same Dr. Victor Herbert surfaced again, filing a 70-page complaint in the U.S. District Court in Iowa. He charged the officials of the National Health Federation, a rival to the AMA, and other alternate health care practices had labeled him. Kirkpatrick Dilling, the attorney for the defendants, termed the suit a flagrant attempt to destroy freedom of choice in health care in the United States. Dilling pointed out that Herbert was backed by a shadow group called the American Council for Science and Health, a front for major food manufacturing companies. Dr. Herbert was joined at the Pepper hearings by a longtime agent of medical monopoly, Mrs. Anna Rosenberg. She voiced her outrage that there should still be She voiced her outrage that there should still be any competition in the United States for the drug test. A longtime vassal of the Rockefeller family, she has served as a director of the American Cancer Society during its valiant struggle to restrict all treatment to the orthodox and highly profitable cut, slash, and burn technique, which unfortunately for the patients usually proves to be fatal. Anna Rosenberg had been married to Julius Rosenberg, you see. She carried $5,000 a week as labor relations specialist to keep unions out of Rockefeller Center and to keep it underpaid minions on the job. Money, 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 folks. The Coordinated Conference of Health Information ran amok for some 10 years, sending hundreds of victims to prison on what were in most instances flimsy or trumped-up charges. Desired effect to terrorize everyone who had become active in the alternate health care field was achieved. Most health practitioners went underground or closed up their business. Others left the country. An inevitable reaction against these terrorist operations set in. By 1974, there were public demands for congressional investigations of the SWAT tactics used by the Post Office and the U.S. Public Health Service against elderly housewives. Such an investigation would inevitably have revealed that these conscientious and dedicated public servants were actually faceless tools of the sinister behind the scenes figures who manipulate the government of the United States for their own power and their profit. Needless to say, no such congressional investments were ever held. Of course not. Of course not. Instead, the CCHI suddenly went underground. They were immune from countersuits by their victims because all action had been taken against the victims by federal agents. They were not immune according to the statutes, but the chance of recovering anything against them in a federal court was remote. The present writer has a numerous occasions sought redress against federal agents in federal courts, only to have a polite federal judge rule against him in every instance, folks. There is no fucking justice in this country. There isn't. Wake up. You might not like what I say, folks, but I speak really rude here, but I'm angry with what I see and hear. And many people believe these clowns, and that's what they are. It's all about money. After the Coordinated Conference on Health Information went underground, health practitioners in the state of California suddenly found themselves under more concerned attacks than ever before. The actress now was in California State Board of Health. It was then found that the steadily minions of CCHI, that is the Coordinated Conference on Health Information, still doing their work on a medical monopoly and merely abandoned their national operations for fear of exposure, but had now nested in the California State Board of Health like a group of diseased rats hiding from inedible repetition. The CCHI was remained embedded in the California State Board of Health ever since, carrying on a steadily warfare against health practitioners in that state. The drug cartel continued to operate unmolested, folks. Of course it was. Can't have any truth, folks. Can't have any goodness in life, can you? Can't do what's right, can you? You're despicable. This war against American citizens fulfills every requirement for prosecution under the status forbidding criminal syndication in the United States. It is a classic case of supposedly non-profit organizations, the American Medical Association, conspiring with certain charitable foundations, notably the American Cancer Society and the Arthritis Foundation, to enlist public agencies to start a war to benefit the national drug test, while denying American citizens the benefit of reasonable price and effective health care. Not only were these repeated violations of the constitutional rights of citizens who were active in the health care movement, often from a sense of public service rather than from a desire for profit. While the evidence of an active conspiracy, the RICO subvert the official government agency for the profit of private multinational drug companies is too abundant to ignore. Those who have been victimized by the CCHI conspiracy can also bring action against veteran L-E-D-E-R-L-E, Hoffman, LaRouche, and the other drug firms who hired these people to do their dirty work. The trial liability is plain. It will be simple to establish in court. Meanwhile, the effect of the CCHI depreciations have been devastating. Millions of Americans, particularly the elderly and the poor, have been forced deprived of reasonable price health care because of this conspiracy. It protects them, folks. It protects all these people, you see. Every bit of it protects. It protects those who do wrong and those who profit. These are wicked people, folks. These victims have been forced to do without their modestly priced health advisors and thrown into the care of a high-priced physician from the AMA, who placed them on expensive drugs produced by the Rockefeller drug monopoly. The fact that many of these drugs are overpriced, ineffective, and potentially dangerous has been routinely covered up by the federal agencies responsible for protecting the public. Yeah, they don't care anything about the public, folks. All they care about is their fucking money. That's all they care about. Those that work in the federal government. Almost all of them are profiting, you see, one way or the other, keeping their mouths shut, not telling the truth, you see. Particularly the Food and Drug Administration. It is notable that the drug cartels have never been investigated by any government agency under the pertinent provisions of the Sherman Antitrust Act, because these cartels are the property of the international financial monopolies, you see. This proves what many observers have charged for years, that the government regulations purportedly enacted by Congress to protect the public have in reality served only to protect the monopolists. By 1986, the medical monopoly had reached a yearly take of $355.4 billion a year, 11% of the gross national product of the United States. The medical monopoly has long had its critics among conscientious members of the medical profession. In December 1922, the Illinois Medical Journal featured an article which declared that the American Medical Association has become a autocratic autocracy. This was during the heyday of Dr. Simmons' rule in Chicago. The article denounced the dictatorial assumption of power over the entire medical profession. Although it had first organized in 1847, the AMA had not formally incorporated until 1897. Why did they incorporate? What did they incorporate for? Do you know what incorporate means, folks? It's a corporation. It's about making money. When it paid a $3 fee to the Secretary of State of Illinois, within 2 years after its incorporation, Doc Simmons had arrived on the scene to begin his 25-year power grab. He soon realized that the medical schools controls the hospitals. The medical examiner boards control the medical schools. And so he expanded the power of the AMA until he had total control over the medical examination boards. The record shows that coincidentally, with the growing power of the AMA, there came a corresponding decline in quality of medical care and the personal responsibility of the physicians to their patients. The AMA enacted a stern code of ethics which served to form a phalanx of protection for any physician who faced criticism for his errors. Ooh-wee. Wow. Such errors in many cases resulted in crippling or deaths of its patients. The same code usually prevents any physician, nurse, or other hospital employee from testifying in court about the errors committed by a physician. I had a friend, still have a friend, who worked in a hospital in Augusta, Georgia. She was a nurse, and what she did was to seriously, I'm not fucking lying to you folks. She would be in charge of that whole floor. Made good money too. Where so many doctors made so many errors in prescribing the wrong drug or the wrong amount in the drug. She did that to protect the hospital from being sued. This is what kind of people you have, folks. This was in the 1990s, 2000s. You see. This is what, so they paid her a handsome wage for years to do just what she did. She had to check everything. She was a nurse, but she practiced that. Like I said, got paid well. because she had to protect the hospital because the hospital itself was trying to protect itself. Because of human errors? Well, doctors' errors. Nobody seems to get on their bandwagon. I mean, get to deal with them, do they? They're protected, you see, everywhere around. In fact, if you, I don't have any insurance, and I don't want it, you see. And you know, I've gone to dentists and doctors and such, and you know, they want to know if you've got insurance because they want to make more money off of you folks, and that's what they do. Insurance actually charges more. And so, no, I'll pay you by cash. I've had issues with dentists who basically say, we want you to pay up front. I said, okay, I'll just get out of the office here and leave. I don't need this shit. You want the fucking money or not? You do the job right, then you get paid. Okay? This is the attitude of these people. They see themselves superior. Somebody needs to knock them down a few times. That's why you need to stand up for yourself against these crooks. If you hadn't had such a sorry food system we have in this country, we wouldn't be in this fucking situation either. We can't hardly find any food anymore. That's right. Real good food anymore, you see, because of all this junk. The record shows that coincidentally, with the growing power of the AMA, there came a corresponding decline. I've already said that. I'm sorry. I'm talking about the nurse. So okay. So they can't testify. They can't even tell about the errors committed by the physicians. My oh my, what a protective class, folks. My oh my, just like the Congress, the same way. One noted physician, Dr. Norman Barnsby, who had long been a prominent member of the U.S. Army medical staff and the U.S. Public Health Service, said, chaos and crime is inevitable so long as doctors abide by the AMA Code of Ethics, the Code of Silence, that is. This is akin to the notorious Omerta, O-M-E-R-T-A, the Code of Silence of the Mafia, which invokes the death penalty to any member who reveals the secrets of the Cosa Nostra, the medical Gnostics. The AMA has set up its own Cosa Nostra, which passes a sentence of professional death against any physician who reveals any medical omissions of crime. The result being ostracized from the profession, denial of hospital privileges, and other drastic forms of punishment. Did you know that? Did you know that, folks? The ethics to which doctors subscribe smells to high heaven. It is a disgrace to any Walton civilization. A peculiar reserve must be maintained by physicians towards the public in regard to professional questioning, as there exist many points in medical ethics and etiquette through which the feelings of medical physicians may be painfully assaulted in their intercourse. Fuck them, and which cannot be understood or appreciated by general society. Neither the subject matter of their differences nor the education of their arbitrations should be made public. Yeah, cover it up. The last part of this paragraph is Dr. Barnsby's direct quote from the AMA Code of Ethics. Note the arrogance of the AMA in claiming that medical ethics and etiquette cannot be understood by general society. Really. Dr. Barnsby continues, I am convinced that the remedy lies in the full abolition of all codes and practices eminent to society and a complete reorganization of the system on the lines of legal supervision or other responsible control. Dr. Barnsby recommendations were ignored by the medical monopoly. Of course he was. As the AP dispatch of February 11, 1988, noted that 5% of doctors lie about credentials, a headline of facts discovered by a large healthcare corporation called Humana Incorporated, found that 39 of its 727 doctors who applied to work in their clinics during a 6-month period, that 5% of them presented false credentials. Even worse, many doctors were convicted of drug or sex charges in one state, simply moved to another state and set up practice, protected by the medical monopoly. There have been horrendous stories in recent years about habitual sex offenders convicted in one state who go to another state and to their professional practice begin their career as violating children once more. This shit's got to stop, folks. A gifted physician, Dr. Ernest Codman, of a distinguished New England family, addressed the annual AMA convention on March 2, 1924, as follows. I have notes on 400 registered cases of supposedly bone sarcoma. Sorry, just All these 400 registered cases, with few exceptions, are records of error and failure. I have many of the foremost surgeons and pathologists in the country convicted in their own handwriting of gross errors in these cases. Legs have been amputated when they should not have been, and left on when they should have been amputated. Dr. Codman's speech left his audience dumbfounded. None of them challenged his statements, but his speech was deliberately hushed by AMA officials. He wirely records that never again during his distinguished professional career was he asked to address any AMA mailing. Of course not. They don't want to hear that. You know, they're human too, folks. They're not on a pedestal neither. From time to time, other dissidents have appeared at AMA meetings to engage in a brief skirmish as they voice their objections and then disappear, forgotten in an all-consuming war to maintain the medical monopoly. Time magazine gave a brief summary of one such episode on June 6, 1970, with the headlines, Schizophrenic AMA. The story noted that some 30 to 40 dissidents, young idealistic doctors, had rushed the podium and taken over the AMA annual meeting for a few anxious moments. Their leader denounced the AMA from the lectern in vigorous terms. The AMA does not stand for the American Medical Association. It stands for the American Murder Association. Armed guards turned back members of other groups which sought to voice their dissatisfaction. The young interns vacated the platform and presumably is chief of surgery at some hospital today, having learned that you can't fight the system. Another dissident, Dr. Robert S. Middleton, noted that in 1975, 787,000 women had hysterectomies, and that 1,007 of them had died as a result of the surgery. He believes that half of these women could have been saved as their surgery was needless. The Washington Post noted on January 21, 1988, that most heart pacemakers may be unneeded. More than half are not clearly beneficial. The story noted that 1 American in 500 now has a pacemaker. This business is only 20 years old, folks, but there are now 120,000 implants in each year. A business taken in $1.5 billion a year. Greenspan complained that many internists are ordering them without consulting a heart specialist. Wow. Dr. Middleton has also complained that terramycin was, and I'll spell it for you, Terramycin, was an ineffective antibiotic. Its major results being that it left children with yellowish green teeth and tetracinogen deposits in their bones. He quotes the Boston Collaborative Drug Surveillance Program, which found that the risk of being killed by drug therapy in American hospitals was 1 in 1,000, and that 30,000 Americans died each year. Now, this folks, is a long time ago. Okay, this book was written in the 1980s, late 80s. Okay, so how many years ago? 96, 2006, 2016, over 35 years ago. Middleton admits no word in his opinion of modern medicine. He calls it a church of death, whose 4 holy waters are immunizations, fluoridated water, intravenous fluids, and silver nitrate. Middleton dismisses all 4 as being of questionable safety. By the early 1940s, ranking members of the AMA had come to the conclusion that much of their problems with their membership laid with the abrasive Morris Fishbein. Most doctors were ultra-conservative in their thinking, and they found Fishbein's antidotes repulsive. Nevertheless, he spun his web of the AMA so fine that it involved everyone in the headquarters. His power was built on censorship, intimidation, and exercise of his power to the limits. It took his rivals almost a decade to get rid of him. Their opportunity came when Fishbein able Lieutenant Dr. Olin West became ill and was no longer able to maintain iron control of the AMA's headquarters for Fishbein's regime. Apparently ignorant of this cabinet against him, Fishbein continued his merry life of travel and recreation, continued to garner many awards and prizes for his medical public relations work. He had been named as Officer of the Cross in the Exclusive Order of the Orange Nassau, a very secretive organization which commemorated the invasion and takeover of England by William of Orange and the subsequently establishment of the Bank of England. Hello, hello. Fishbein made frequent trips to England where he was wined and dined by prominent members of the establishment. They must have believed he could be of use to them. However, none of these honors proved to be of avail when the man who was described by Newsweek as the man with 100 enemies, surely the understatement of the year, was thrown out even more unceremonious than his predecessor, the insavagely quack Doc Simmons. Despite repeated public criticisms of his junket and abuse of his expense accounts, Fishbein confidently announced at his election in June 4, 1949, that he would be around for at least 5 more years. He counted heavily on the traditional schism between two groups of the AMA, the liberals and the conservatives, whom Fishbein declared would never be able to agree on anything. He was wrong, because they did agree that he should be kicked out. United by their common hatred of Morris Fishbein, they formed their conspiracy to assassinate their Caesar. In describing the episode, Martin Mailer notes that since 1944, a sizable faction of the AMA had been resolved to get Fishbein out at any cost. He had been exposed on a national radio program called A Town Meeting of the Air in early 1949 as a habitual liar. He claimed that he had been touring England, visiting the office of general practitioners every day. The radio program revealed that he had actually been attending the Olympics, that he had dined with several members of the British aristocrats and attended a number of plays in London, and then had traveled to Paris for a round of the nightclubs, all in the name of promoting medicine. The program aired on February 22, 1949 by Nelson Cruikshank, demolished Fishbein's reputation, noting that Fishbein had not gone near any doctor's office in England during his stay. As for Fishbein's report about his trip, Cruikshank branded it a lie, called it a libel of professional, which is proud of his tradition of service to his patients. Fishbein's life was described as a constant round of visits to New York plays, the Stork Club, and nightclubs in London and Paris. As a result, now folks, this is unbelievable when you think about it. He's going places and being a part of these corrupt people. He's also involved. As a result of this publicity, the AMA, as his 1949 convention, passed a unanimous resolution that Dr. Morris, which he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't doing that post, but he was called a Dr. Morris Fishbein, be removed from all posts in which he did any writing and speaking. This resolution provided that it be implemented by as soon as possible, which turned out to be that very afternoon. By evening, Fishbein was gone from AMA headquarters, never to return. One of the literal losses of Fishbein's departure was his column, which he had fancifully termed Dr. Pepsi's Diary. It was described by one critic as a running Lotto-random accounts of Morris Fishbein's private life. Each Christmas, the diary was contrived between boards and distributed at the Fishbein Christmas card to nearly everyone who had permanent mailing addresses. Like all the Fishbeins or Chavinistas, the expense of this largesse was entirely borne by the due-paying members of the AMA. For years, Fishbein had used the awesome power of the AMA seal of acceptance to force drug companies to accede to his wishes. Harper Magazine noted in November 1949 that the seal is probably the biggest single puller of advertisements ever concocted. The journal is far and away the most popular publication in the world. Fishbein had absolute power. He had often talked as if he carried the seal in his pocket. It was also the source of other men's power. After Fishbein's forced departure, the AMA officials moved to dilute the center of power at the Chicago headquarters. Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry changed its name to the Council on Drugs in 1956. The seal of acceptance was dropped entirely. Ben Gaffin and associates had reported to the AMA. The advertisers in the general field that the AMA, especially through the councils, distrusted them and views them as potential crooks who would become actively unethical if not constantly watched. This has been Fishbein's paranoia approach, but his attitude had been based on the need to maintain control and to force contributions from the ethical drug manufacturers. As soon as the seal of acceptance was dropped, the AMA revenue from advertisers dropped, and advertisers doubled in 5 years and 10 years, and it tripled from $4 million to a year to over $12 million. In retrospect, Fishbein's arrogancy and short-sighted policies have been costing the AMM millions of dollars a year in lost revenues. Dr. Ernest Howard of the AMA offered gratuitous reasons for dropping the seal, saying it was too arbitrary and too much authority was vested in one body. There were also certain legal problems. Despite the fact that Fishbein had gone, some aspects of his malign influence lingered at the AMA headquarters for years, costing the organization many millions of dollars and a great deal of unfavorable publicity. Especially, environment was Fishbein's burning determination to destroy any possibility of a socialized medicine in the United States. It was paradoxically that the AMA leadership under Fishbein dominance should be so vehemently against government intervention in the medical field when they had used government agencies for years for their own purposes, particularly the Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Public Health Service, and the National Counselor Institute. One authority, James G. Burrell, traces the AMA's stance towards compulsory health insurance, which changed from exploratory interest to violent hostility between 1917 and 1920. This stance was justified as anti-communism, it being well known that socialized medicine had long been a primary goal of the Communist Party. A select group of prominent American leftists had been summoned to Moscow for special indoctrination of this goal. They attended a summer course at Moscow University on the organization of medicine as a state function. The group includes such stalwart leaders, liberals, as such as George S. Counts and, of course, John Dewey. You remember him, the one who's part of the educational deal, and everybody puts him on a pedestal. On their return, they began a campaign of public agitation for national health care. Their first convert was a liberal Republican named Senator Henry Cabot Lodge. In fact, he represented New England groups of bankers who were allied with Rockefeller and maintained the medical monopoly. On March 1st, 1940, Senator Lodge introduced a bill for health insurance which provided $40 a year for health care. The bill was quickly shelved, but the ground had been thrown down. Fishbein had no intentions of turning his fiefdom over to any government department. Over the next several decades, the AMA spent millions of dollars fighting to socialize medicine, all of it raised by special levies on American doctors. It also became enmeshed in several expensive antitrust cases as a result of its activities. As early as 1938, the AMA had been indicted by the Department of Justice, you hear that, in the Group Health Association case. In 1937, a group of government employees had borrowed $40 from Home Owner Loan Company to start a group hospital. The plan offered group medical care for $26 a year for an individual and $39 for a family. This association, which took the name Group Health Association, hired 9 physicians. The District of Columbia Medical Society then refused these physicians permission to use the hospitals or to consult specialists. On April 4, 1941, 4 years later, a jury found the AMA and the District Medical Society guilty of antitrust law violations. The 2 organizations and 11 physicians have been indicted for restraint of trade. Those convicted include Dr. Morris Fishbein. 2.5 years later, the Supreme Court upheld their conviction in 1943. A fine of $2,500 was levied, and the AMA was ordered to cease and desist in its interference with the Group Health Association. The AMA fared a little better in its 20-year battle against Medicare. The preservation of the integrity of the local physicians was a worthwhile goal. However, it was already under the control of the Rockefeller medical monopoly, you see. It is difficult to see how the establishment of socialized medicine in the United States would change anything. Menard has it. Time noted in December 10, 1948, that the AMA had assessed to each of its members $25 for a campaign to spend $3.5 million on medical education, a campaign to turn people against socialized medicine. It was the first such assessment of the AMA in 100 years of operation. Almost 2 decades later, the Saturday Evening Post noted in its issue of January 1, 1966, that the AMA has spent $5 million in 1964 and 1965 battling the Medicare lobby in Washington. It was noted that the AMA had $23 million income that year from its annual dues of $45 per year from the sale of advertisements in the AMA publications to drug companies and medical supply houses. Time on December 1st, 1978, noted that the judge, Fred Barnes, administration law judge of the Federal Trade Commission, had ruled that the AMA Code of Ethics illegally restrains competition among doctors by preventing them from advertising. He further ruled that the AMA ethical guidelines should in the future be approved by the FTC. The AMA issued an indicting press release opposing the decision. There is no legal procedure in the United States for the federal bureaucracy to write or approve a code of ethics for any of the learned professions. The subject of the AMA Code of Ethics had already come up several times. Once from Science magazine, noted in June 21st, 1940, on the Bureau of Investigation of Frauds and Charlatans, that the question was raised, should medical ethics be changed? The principle of medical ethics as set down at present can be improved in wording and arrangement, but it also believes that the present is not the time to do the rewriting. It seems wise to let the muddy waters settle before any consideration is given to so fundamental nature of our organizations as our principles of medical ethics. Although the speaker was not identified, this pious pronunciation could also have come from Fishbein himself. The speaker goes on to admit, rather coldly, that the principle of medical ethics can be improved, but that ended the matter. The passage of Medicare, after the AMA has sent so many millions opposing it, apparently changed nothing. He proved to be an unexpected windfall for many of the most unscrupulous members of the medical profession. They had no problem padding bills for fees to the tune of millions of dollars per year per practitioners. In 1982, Medicare paid out some $48.3 billion, while Medicaid paid out $38.2 billion. The most conservative estimate believed that some $11 billion of these funds were skimmed and illegal profits. The heirs of Morris Fishbein and the AMA may have lost the battle to stop socialized medicine, but they had won the war. As we previously noted, the AMA trustees at a meeting on November 2nd, 1963, resolved to eliminate chiropractic, their biggest rival. Though a committee on quackery, the secretary of this committee reported back to the trustees on January 4th, 1971, that its prime minister first the containment of chiropractor and ultimately the elimination of chiropractic. And more blatant mention of conspiracy can hardly be found to any organization records. The committee's special investigative unit, headed by the general counsel of the AMA, Robert Throckmorton, Throckmorton, involved using insurance companies, hospitals, state medical license boards, public and private colleges, and lobbyists. Every method of intimidation and censorship was used. Dr. Phil Weinstein, a California neurologist, had given many lectures to chiropractic groups on diagnosing illnesses of the spine. The AMA ordered him to stop all such appearances. He sent a note of apology after counseling a forthcoming lecture. Please accept our sincerest apologies for the late cancellation due to circumstances beyond our control. We were unaware that delivering medical lectures to your organization was prohibited. Throckmorton also tried to put chiropractic schools out of business by preventing the government from granting guaranteed student loans or grants from the government research on chiropractic colleges, that is, you see. Okay, so let's continue to see what this is amazing, folks. From the government for research of chiropractic colleges. He prevented them from getting accreditation, lobbying every state to prevent the establishment of a government-created accreditation body, and was furious when the HEW Office of Education, being an agency of educators rather than physicians, resisted his efforts and in 1974 sanctioned the Council on Chiropractic Education as a national accreditation body for chiropractic schools. The AMA brought pressure on C.W. Post University, a division of Long Island University, to drop its course designed for pre-chiropractic students in 1972. In the late 1960s, the AMA Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals imposed new requirements on hospitals. The AMA Principles of Medical Ethics barred its members from all forms of exchange for chiropractors. The AMA Joint Commission on Accreditation letter, August 13, 1973, to a hospital administrator declared that any arrangement you would make with chiropractors in your hospital will be unacceptable to the Joint Commission. This would be a violation of the Principles of Medical Ethics published by the AMA that is also a requirement of the JCAH. On January 9, 1973, the JCAH wrote to a hospital in Silver City, New Mexico. This is an answer to a letter of December 18, referring to a bill which may be passed in New Mexico, that hospitals must accept chiropractors as members of the medical staff. You are absolutely correct. The unfortunate results of the most ill-advised legislation means that the Joint Committee could withdraw and refuse accreditation of the hospital that had chiropractors on its staff. The AMA did force the Veterans Administration to refuse payments to veterans for chiropractic services. These tactics have been reported to the AMA as positive results. A confidential memorandum dated September 21, 1967 by the Committee on the Quackery boasted to the trustees that basically the committee short-range objections for containing the cult of chiropractor and any additional recognition it might achieve revolves around 4 points. Doing everything within our power to see that chiropractor coverage under Title number 18 of Medicare law is not attained. 2, doing everything within our power to see that the registration or a listing with the U.S. Office of Education or the establishment of chiropractor accreditation agency is not achieved. 3, to encourage continuous separation of 2 national chiropractic associations. 4, encourage state medical societies to take the initiative in their state legislature with regard to legislation that might affect the practice of chiropractic. Because of the flagrant activities of the AMA, several chiropractors finally sued, charging conspiracy. The case dragged on for years, and on August 27, 1987, after 11 years of continual litigation, federal judge Susan Gessendamer of the U.S. District Court found the AMA, the American College of Surgeons, and the American College of Radiology guilty of conspiring to destroy the profession of chiropractor. During the proceeding, the AMA frequently acknowledged that they never had nor have any knowledge of the content or quality of the courses taught at chiropractic colleges. Judge Gessenthal wrote a 101-page opinion and issued an order of permanent injunction requiring the AM to cease and desist from restricting regulations or impeding of aiding and abetting others, from restricting regulations and impeding the freedom of any AMA member or any other institution or hospital to make an individual decision as to whether or not the AMA member, institution, or hospital shall professionally association with chiropractors, chiropractor students, or chiropractor institutions. Thus ended the legacy of malice and obstructionism which Morris Fishburne had left the AMA, although he had been firmly relieved of all duties at his 98th meeting of the AMA on June 20th, 1949. The AMA had been bedeviled by his obsessions for 4 more decades. Another obsession was his refusal to admit any black physicians as members of the AMA. It was also heard to refer contemporaries to der Schwarz, a Yiddish term of contempt for blacks. Whenever the subject of admitting blacks came up, as it did repeatedly during his regime, his policy continued as the AMA for 2 more decades until 1968, when the AMA was forced to admit blacks. Previously, the blacks had maintained their own organization, the National Medical Association, that is, and hailing the decision, time referred patronizing to the Moss-backed AMA. The fact that Simmons and Fishbein was able to impose their petty concerns on the national organization for half a century reflect little credit on its members. One of the most telling comments was made by T. Swan Hardy in the Forum, June 1929, in an article with the title, How Scientific Are Our Doctors? Hardy wrote, medicine as a profession is not distinguished for the mentality of its members. The average intelligence is lower than in perhaps any other profession. Organized medicine in America is unalterably opposed to any standard or reorganization which would make the medical monopoly through scientific. 2, make such therapy generally available to all who need it. 3, diminish the incomes of incompetent practitioners. It is noteworthy that the insignia of the medical profession is 2 snakes intertwined on a staff. However, the University of Rochester decided that this was excessive. Recently, it reduced the 2 snakes to 1. The caduceus is the mythological symbol of the Roman god Mercury. He was the patron of messengers, but he also had a somewhat unsavory reputation as associate of outlaws, merchants, and thieves. In the ancient world, merchants were synonymous with the other 2 categories. So that's my conclusion tonight. Eustace Mullins, with his book, dealing with what I call murder by injection. By the way, we have not even dealt with the whole issue of injections at all. We're just dealing with what I call enormous corruptions with the AMA. I've also done a book. You can look back in some of my videos. It probably won't be the live ones. It'll be on YouTube. I read a book dealing with Harry Hoxsey, who had to deal with him also. Harry Hoxsey was a brilliant man, folks. He didn't really need any money. And if I could consider anybody, he actually helped people with cancer. You need to go back to that video that I've shared and read what this man really did. He charged people hardly anything, and sometimes if they couldn't afford it, he said, fine, no problem. He did it, and his nurse, and I've told the story, and I'll just tell it really briefly here. He actually eventually was thrown out of his position by the same guy, Mr. Fishbein, who was determined, and they say 1949, but he was still active in many ways in court proceedings trying to destroy Harry Hoxsey. Harry Hoxsey had discovered an oil well business himself and made well. He was in the oil business too. So he wasn't hurting for money. He wasn't actually, he was not someone who needed the money for his basically helping people with cancer. He was doing what his dad told him to do, and he was obeying what I call the remedy that he got from watching horses deal with what we call herbs and dealing with what I call curing cancer. And that he was actually forced all his offices. In fact, the federal government came in, which is none of their business. He didn't do any damage to anybody. But see, Mr. Morris Fishbein was very powerful, and he had money, and he destroyed people any way he could. And it was all about him having what he wanted, you see. Very selfish man. Um, so what happened simply is that the government came in and closed all his clinics. And the last one left was the one in Dallas, Texas. And eventually, Mr. Huxley pretty much lost zealous for life. You see, he was a different type of person, folks. He was a commoner. He got down with his patients, um, and if they didn't have any money, he would not charge them. If they could pay him on a whatever monthly or whatever, that was fine. It wasn't the money. He eventually died what I would call probably of a broken heart. He was helping people, and he found joy in that. And I don't know if again, I would suggest you go back to that video or even buy the book by Harry Hoxsey. It's not even by him; it's by others. How his nurse, his head nurse, he told her when she was in Colorado, and they were about to, they were after him in any way they could do to throw him in jail. And he told her, basically, you got to go across the border um, and start a place there. And that's what she did. She started a place in Tijuana, in Mexico. It's odd that basically you would think simply is this is really odd when you think of Mexico as a very crime-ridden place. But in reality, folks, many Americans go across the border to get their cancer cures or their cancer illnesses healed at this particular place, because you cannot do that here in America anymore. And I doubt you can even do it in Canada. And then actually, in fact, it's so powerful this group is. Many places in the world, they don't have that neither. They still do the 100-year remedy, they call it. It's not a remedy, of cutting, burning, and using chemotherapy. And they haven't really made any headway of anything any better. It's gotten worse. And, it's about profits, folks. It's not about people. So I hope that this video will wake you up, see what is going on, how devastating how powerful people can do, and to buy off what I would call political positions, offices, whatever you want to call it, and to push that upon others when the drugs have never been, and they've never have been. Most of these drugs today, folks, have never been approved again. That's not gone. It's still there. And your best way of solving this stuff is to basically use herbs. Herbs are there are ways, and you go into Harry Hoxsey, he gives you the remedy. He actually states in the book, folks, what he used. Now he doesn't tell you how much he put in it, but he basically tells you what's in it. On the exterior cancers, that is on the outside, and also the interior. And he didn't charge anything for that. And in fact, as far as I know, he's dead and gone now. But what I'm saying simply is, it wasn't an autobiography. It was actually someone else did the work. He was given the information. It wasn't about the money. It never was with him. In fact, the same attitude for the nurse, as far as I know, and I've actually shared that the story of that also in my videos, is that his nurse went to Mexico. Now she's passed away now, but she lived in a trailer there herself. She didn't live in a. She lived right on the campus there with the clinic. Again, it wasn't about money, folks. It was about helping people to cure them. Now, I don't know what it's like now since she's been passed, and I don't know that. The point simply is that this place is worldwide. It's known throughout the world. If you get cancer and you're not able to heal yourself in a way here or else place, you're whatever, you go to Tijuana, Mexico. That's where you go. I don't know any other places. There are other people who are practicing, who are trying to help people. There was a Canadian nurse that helped out also. There was also not Linus Pauling, but another woman had come to me who was using herbs and special fruits and vegetables to heal people who have cancer also. You see. And anyway, I hope you enjoy the production of what I've shared tonight. It's longer than I normally do, but I just wanted to read the whole chapter 2 here. It was just very important, to deal with this whole issue. Medicine is today is in many ways it's not about a cure. It never has been. It never has. They don't even use the word cure. They won't, because they don't. They don't cure you, and that's the sad story. You see. So, thank you for being here. I wish you a good night. You take care. Again, my videos are actually on Facebook, Discerning What Is True. Also on Odyssey, Discerning What Is True. When you look down in YouTube, you'll look for my most recent videos, which will be live. I do this because I care about other people, and the truth's got to be out there. Yes, I do feel these things. When people do wrong, it's wrong. And I get very angry about things like that, because that's not the way you treat people, folks. You see. And we are supposed to, all life is precious, all of it. Not only for humans, but also for animals, whatever is precious. And unless we develop that type of attitude and guard against those who actually are anti-life, then we will suffer the consequences. So this is for those who have ears to hear, for eyes to see. So have a good night. You take care, okay?